it's a mandatory 6-month license suspension.
In the C2C Express, the rules are pretty vague, but they want you to have a car that's worth about $3,000.
Organized from some crazy Kiwis that came into the US once a year and bought cars before 1980 so they'd be period correct and have them break down across the country. So it sounded like a load of fun.
I decided I'm going to get a junkyard LS engine. I generally keep the hood closed, so hopefully no Mopar guys will lynch me. So the first person I called was Ed Bolian.
After a couple of these things being fully in the driver's seat, I'm really looking forward to something that's more of an arrive and drive program.
I happen to have that situation that I want to offer you.
And Forrest was going to come along with us, who had been kind of my countermeasures expert for the record run.
I was going to take my favorite car in my favorite theme and do my favorite thing with the record holder of the Cannonball Run. I had to go to the O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Ed Bolian and Forrest were flying up, and we were going to head to Manhattan to the start.
And then there were going to be about 11 or 12 teams setting off on a Saturday. Unfortunately, there were some pretty serious accidents that befell some of the teams, some breakdowns, and some unfortunate calamity that kept several of the teams from starting, but it ended up we were in New York with 6 different teams to run the C2C Express in 2016.
We had a little bit of trouble on the way out. Ed was testing the top speed abilities of the Bluesmobile, and we made a pretty spirited run in Pennsylvania. Got up to about 120, 125, and the car just kept getting louder and louder. Well, it turns out Ed had blown a hole in my muffler from the sustained acceleration. So that was one thing that we're going to have to fix when we got into New York. Forrest and I headed over to Ivy Tuned. They got the splitter all sorted out, sort of bent back into place. He found me a muffler shop. We got the car over there. They replaced the mufflers. So we headed into Manhattan to go meet up with Ed, who is now with Alex Roy having coffee. For a Cannonball fan, it was just like a dream come true. I couldn't even believe it was happening. We met at the Gallagher's restaurant in Manhattan, which is a pretty famous place because it's the start point of famous races like the Gumball Rally. It's a real fancy steakhouse, but we enjoyed a nice dinner at Gallagher's and head out to the start.
Some of the guys wanted to drive kind of day, night, day, rather than just drive night, day, night, which maximizes the time in which you have fewer other cars on the road.
Most teams decided to leave either in the morning or around noon, 1 o'clock, where Ed and I decided we were going to wait until 8 p.m., kind of when traffic died down, because one of the challenges of Cannonball is getting out of Manhattan. Ed punched the clock at the Red Ball garage and ran down the ramp. I made it about 100 feet before we hit our first stoplight.
Make decent time out of the Lincoln Tunnel. We're out in 11 or 12 minutes, which is about the industry standard for such things.
Traffic was a little thick in New Jersey, being 8, 9 p.m., but we made our best way we could through it and got into Pennsylvania about 10 p.m. and I was able to really open it up. We got up to about 132 miles an hour on one stretch, which was our top speed of the run, but we did run into another problem.
There was probably something wrong with the drive shaft or something to that effect, so it really didn't like going much more than about 102 miles an hour.
It felt like the car was going to rattle to pieces, and we still had another 2,500 miles to go. We pulled off on the side of the road. Ed hopped in behind the wheel. I hopped in the back seat to kind of take a break.
And I've made it all 2,800 miles of the 2850 run, of the 3205, 2904 winning run, with no tickets and really no cop issues. This drive was not that. I took over on my first driving leg, the second leg of the trip, and we're kind of weaving through Pennsylvania, which was under some heavier construction than normal. I asked Forrest, who was spotting at that time, I said, "Is there a cop up there?" He looks through the binoculars, looking around, looking at the radar detectors, and says, "No, it's not." So I roll back into the throttle to immediately have the lights turned on to the cop that was sitting right next to the "Your Speed Here" sign. Explained to Forrest what a useless human being he is at the moment, and the cop comes up, mentions absolutely nothing of our Blues Brothers motif, of the Mission from God sticker across the back of the car, of the fact we're in a 1974 Dodge Monaco Bluesmobile, of the fact that we've got endless screens and countermeasures littered across the old dash. Only wanted to talk about the fact that he had clocked me at 90 and a 55. So he takes my license and goes back, and he comes back and says, "You know what? I understand. I'm gonna do you guys a favor. I'm gonna write it for 80 and a 55 rather than 90 and a 55. Now I came to find out that you can't find a lawyer in the state of Pennsylvania that will fight much of a speeding ticket, particularly if it is in a construction zone. But if it's any more than 25 miles per hour over the limit in a construction zone, it's a mandatory 6-month license suspension. So he did me quite a favor there, because that would have been quite a problem, even though there isn't reciprocity with Pennsylvania and Georgia.
It was about a 12-minute stop and we were back on the road. But now Ed obviously doesn't want to go too fast because, well, if he gets pulled over again, it's probably not going to fare well for us. And I pressed on through Pennsylvania pretty decently. We got into Ohio. We're still running about 100 miles an hour. And we decided we're going to make our first gas stop. And I was a little numb to the speed, and the light rain probably didn't help my traction much. So as I was coming down to the end of the off-ramp, there was a stop sign. Well, I get on the brakes and the tires lock up. And I'm heading right towards the stop sign. So I'm just about to go off the road, and I had a choice to make. I could either try to save the car and keep it on the road by easing up off the brakes, or I could let off the brakes and steer to the right of the stop sign and go through a ditch and hope I don't mess up the car too much, or I could crash right into the stop sign. So at the last minute, I let off the brakes just enough to regain traction, and I kept the car on the road. I avoided the stop sign, and we just kind of blew through the stop sign and into the gas station. We had it down where Ed would hop out of the driver's seat, put his credit card in the one pump. I would pop out, put my credit card in the pump on the other side, drag the hose around to the fuel cell, and we would fill with 2 pumps, while Forrest went in to use the bathroom, and we kind of just rotated around. And the fuel stop takes about 4 minutes or so, and we were back on the road with Ed behind the wheel.
We start to run into this miserably dense fog, almost impossible to drive through. We could hardly maintain 100 miles an hour.
And then disaster struck. It appeared that there had been some sort of rollover accident, and they had completely shut down the westbound lanes.
And for 45 minutes, literally, we just sat on the side of the road. Well, I should say, Forrest sat around tinkering. Arne was distraught at the dissolution of his effort to best our time from 29:04, and I had a wonderful nap.
And I was just devastated because I really wanted to beat the Cannonball competition record that Ed had set in 2015 of 32 hours and 5 minutes, and this 45-minute stop coupled with the 12-minute stop by the police were surely going to wreck that. I just simply can't give up. So eventually they opened the highway, and the cops got us down to a single file line and ran us through this stop, and we're back on the road and heading hard into Illinois. Every time I would be in the back seat to rest, something bad would happen. So we're in Oklahoma, we're in a Bluesmobile in September, and it's pretty hot. It's about 90 degrees. We're wearing suits, and the car has no air conditioning. So I was doing my best to sleep in the back seat. And while I was sleeping, Forrest was driving, Ed was spotting, and they came up upon a Chevy Impala. Well, they were trying to make out if it was actually a police officer, and Forrest decided, well, it doesn't look like a police officer, so I'm going to pass him.
So over time we did pass the cop, but that allowed him, unfortunately, at a very small speed difference, the chance to examine our dashboard. And he decided he wanted to know a little bit about that, and so he cut in behind us and followed us for about another 10 miles, ran our tag, and Forrest was miserably nervous, going about 70.0 miles per hour as much as he could. And I'm like, dude, you got to go a little bit faster or he's going to assume we're running drugs. He turned on his lights. Arne at that point was awake. The cop approached from the passenger side. So I rolled down the window and I said, hi, Mr. Officer, how are you? What are you up to today? And he was kind of taken aback. He's like, well, I just patrolled this area. And, oh, really? Well, where do you go? You know, I know that we're getting close to the state line up here. How much of this is yours? Well, I go here and here. And he gets tired of explaining his daily routine to me. And he's like, starts talking about our crime. What are y'all up to? Like, well, you know what? We're headed out to see some friends, kind of doing this little costume thing, and we're going to meet some people in Los Angeles, of all places. He's like, really? That's a long way. I said, yeah, it is. That ended up kind of calming him down, and he knew we were not up to anything terribly promiscuous.
Well, the unfortunate thing was, instead of turning around, he just stayed behind us for the next 30 miles or so, kind of slowing us down even more.
Forrest and I had run the gas tank pretty low.
And I had told these guys, I wasn't sure if what was in this factory gas tank and, running a gas tank that's 40 years old down really low, could suck some junk up into the fuel pump. And the fuel pump did not sound happy.
140 miles out of Albuquerque, the thing just shuts off. Of course, Arne is seeing his hopes and dreams of an aspirational time and all of ours at the idea of even, finishing this race just dissolve.
How are we going to fix this? It was clear that we were going to not make it to the Portofino.
Of course, we're all in suits and ties and drenched in sweat, but Forrest is laying on the side of the road. I don't know how he had changed into some sort of coverall situation, but he looked much different at that moment than I'd recognized him a few hours before.
So we're getting ready to take this thing apart, and it dawns on me. Why don't we hit it with a hammer?
And channeling his own inner Jeremy Clarkson, Forrest uses that hammer and simply starts laying on the ground, banging against the fuel pump.
And sure enough, that did the trick. Immediately, the fuel pump kicked back on.
Turn the key, and it fires. And I just lay into the throttle. And we used this ridiculous shifter that came along with the engine swap, and got the thing into gear, and I'm like, y'all jump in. In the process, Forrest slams my navigation system in the door jamb.
We text the group back and let them know that we were back on the road, and John was pretty upset, saying, I can't believe that you guys were stopped on the highway, your car broke down, and that you've been pulled over twice, and you're probably still going to beat us. So Ed continued on driving through New Mexico and Arizona, and I took over the wheel as we got into California. At this point, it's the middle of the night, and we're a little delirious. Ed's doing his best to keep me awake and keep me focused. We headed toward Barstow, California, where we were meeting Cannonball motorcycle record holder and Cannonball electric vehicle record holder Carl Reese. He was leading us in, and it was probably quite a sight to see as this red Tesla goes speeding down the highway with a Bluesmobile in tow. And it really became apparent that this was probably the best scenario to have somebody leading us in, because by this time we were just beat. So many different highways in Los Angeles. If you've ever been there, it's just a mess of highways going this way and that. And clearly we would probably still be out there trying to find the Portofino had it not been for Carl Reese. And our final time was 34 hours and 17 minutes, which ended up being not only the winning time of the C2C Express, but also the fastest time for any antique car in the Cannonball Run.